Hi everybody, welcome to week 11. We're already in November. That means the course is moving along fast. And this week I want to talk about our second week of dealing with the balanced scorecard. Let's move right into that. Alright, so as I have done nearly every single week, I want to remind you all where we're at. So this semester, really, so far, we've made extensive use of John Bryson's 10-step model from the Bryson text. You've looked at that a lot. We've also looked at Mark Moore's strategic triangle, and you've written several papers on that, actually several discussions plus one paper. And some of you are using the strategic triangle as your term project. We've talked about some of Jen Lockman's tips on strategic planning, and I just want to say that I think for a lot of you, especially in the area of nonprofit, Jen Lockman in the future will come in very handy for you, because I think she has some very practical tips on how a nonprofit can discover itself really through the vehicle of strategic planning. And then last week we did this overview of the balanced scorecard. And this week we want to finish our discussion of Kaplan and Norton's balanced scorecard by applying it to your term project organization. Before I do get to that, and this is something I've done most weeks, I've reminded you of what's still left in the course. We do have, as I say there in the last bullet, about 4 discussions left, including this week. We have 2 written projects left, and they both relate to your term project. So on November 19th, your term project outline is due. And I've actually had students ask me in the past why I require you to do an outline, and I'll tell you why specifically. That is because it allows you to clarify your thinking on what your term project should look like in outline form. When you start writing this outline, what I'd really like you to do is look at the assignments tab and notice that I provide you several resources that you can and should use in developing an outline. An outline is really an excellent way, especially if you don't write that many papers. An outline is really an excellent way for you to actually figure out what you want to say. It puts it in this format that allows you to think through what your major points are, you know, what your introduction should look like, what your conclusion should look like, and allows you to think about, hey, what am I omitting? What am I putting in that maybe I can take out? That's why I have you do an outline. And the second thing, major of course, is your term project final paper, which is a requirement for everyone, by the way. And I only say that because I had a student once who thought that they could do everything but that because they had enough points to pass. Well, there were 2 problems. One is the student miscalculated the math. They really didn't have enough points to pass. And the second is that it's a requirement of the class. So please don't think that it's not a requirement. And I will tell you on both those things, both the outline and the term project, your interview is a very large part of that. However, your term project needs to be more than simply a recap of your interview. So those are coming up. So let's talk about Kaplan and Norton. I give you one additional reading this week in week 11. That's the 2007 piece by Kaplan and Norton. And this is what Kaplan and Norton say. If you use the balanced scorecard as a strategic planning process, there are really 4 processes, 4 perspectives that go on when you're talking about the balanced scorecard. So what are the roles of the balanced scorecard in strategic planning? In other words, it's not just a way to measure how your organization is doing, but it's a way to help plan. So what the balanced scorecard does for you are these 4 things according to Kaplan and Norton. First, it translates your vision. So let's assume you have a vision for your organization. And so what this helps you do is translate it. In other words, it builds a consensus around the organization's vision from the perspective that you're drawing. So, from the learning and growth perspective, for example, if I'm an employee, a staff member, maybe even a volunteer, it helps me translate this vision into concrete things that occur in my training as a result of that vision. It provides communication and linkage. So actually, what this does, it helps managers in all parts of the organization link the vision, again, to concrete steps, up and down the chain of command, if you will, in the organization. It helps in business planning. So in other words, it helps you to integrate the financial and the business plans of the organization with the strategy. And then finally, it helps in feedback and learning. It helps you to say, in other words, if you say to someone, you're not supporting the vision of the organization, or you are supporting the vision of the organization, it gives you ways to do that by referring to specific objectives from each of the 4 perspectives. And so how does the balanced scorecard relate the vision of the organization, the strategic vision of the organization, to the 4 perspectives? So if you look at that chart, you see right in the center it says vision and strategy with arrows going to each of the 4 perspectives. So the key takeaways of this slide are that the vision and strategy of the organization is integrated through these 4 perspectives in more concrete ways. And the second one really is a key, and I think this is a key in every organization, that the 4 perspectives do not stand alone. They relate to each other. Now, why do I say that? Well, here's why I say that, and we talked about this, I think, a lot in week 1. If I work for an organization, say I work for a nonprofit, I might not really know what the strategic plan of the organization is. I might not really know what the strategic vision of the organization is. Now, do I have to know those things to go to my job every day and do the specific tasks that I'm assigned? No, I probably don't. However, would I be better at my assigned tasks if I actually did know the vision and the mission and what the leadership of the organization actually wanted to do? Would I be better at my job if I knew those things? And I would argue that I would know those things. So, when employees go to work and they say, why am I doing this? Why am I putting these numbers in this Excel spreadsheet every day? Why am I doing this audit of the daily sales every day? What does that mean? I would argue that it's incumbent on leadership in every organization, whether we're talking about a for-profit organization, a non-profit organization, a government organization, it's incumbent on leadership to make sure that staff, and for our purposes, staff could be paid staff or volunteer staff, to understand that strategic vision. And one of the ways they do that is through these 4 perspectives. And so you notice on this chart we take these 4 perspectives and we put them sort of in this cyclical process, and it continues to go around with balanced scorecard in the center. So first, a manager translates the vision, then a manager communicates and links the vision, and that relates to business planning, and that relates to feedback and learning. And from feedback and learning, we maybe modify the vision. So the takeaway here is that the balanced scorecard is a vehicle for this cyclical process. And the second takeaway, number 2 there, is that these processes really are sequential. And the next chart's going to talk about that from the article by Kaplan and Norton. Okay, so this is something that's really important in the article, and I want to stress it because we're not really in the class here. I'm having you do a couple of exercises with the balanced scorecard, and so from that you kind of get the false impression that this can all be done just in a few minutes or in a day of talking about it. The key takeaway that Kaplan and Norton put here, that this is a 30-month process approximately. And so I have a chart here that talks about 12 months of this 30-month process. So they're talking about a commitment to strategic planning. So what they're really saying is, if you're an organization and you want to use the balanced scorecard as your vehicle for implementing a strategic plan, that you need to have a commitment of about 2 to 3 years to do that. In other words, it's going to take you time to both design how the objectives for each of the 4 perspectives, and then to implement them. So let's only think of this from one of the perspectives, the learning and growth perspective. The learning and growth perspective refers to how you recruit, train, and retain your staff. And again, that staff could be paid employees, it could be volunteers, it might even be contractors that do work for your organization. But let's think in terms of a nonprofit. Your staff might consist of paid staff as well as volunteer staff. If you really want to implement a learning and growth perspective that applies to your vision, it's going to take you about 30 months to do that. Why is that? Because you need to design objectives for that staff, and then you need to measure how staff is doing against those objectives, and then finally you need to have some feedback and say, hey, look, I designed 5 objectives here and one of them really just doesn't work and I'm going to throw it out, or I need to add 2 more, for example. And so it's a commitment of time to actually use the balanced scorecard to affect your strategic plan. And so that's a real key takeaway from this article. So please read that article carefully and understand that it is a commitment of time. Just like any of the strategic planning literature we've reviewed so far, really gives you that truth, really, that strategic planning is a commitment of time. And so what's all that have to do with this week? And really, this is a very short lecture, so I'm glad you've stuck it out with me to now. Here's what I want you to do this week. I want you to use your term project organization, and I want you to design what I call a mini balanced scorecard. So that I have 4 steps here that I want you to employ in the discussion this week. And you can see them right here. Number 1, write a short paragraph to remind all of us about your term project organization, the name of the organization and its mission. And then number 2, create a mini balanced scorecard. So there's 4 perspectives. Provide at least 1 statement for each perspective that provides you with an objective for that perspective that supports the strategic vision of your organization. And then for each of those objectives, provide 1 way you would measure it. It doesn't have to be, completely thorough. I mean, you can sort of make up a hypothetical way you would measure that objective. And it doesn't have to be a complicated mathematical model, but think about how you would measure the objective as either a quantitative or a qualitative sort of measure of how you would show success in that objective. And then think about whether using the balanced scorecard is useful for your particular organization or any other organization that you've been a part of. So that's it for this week. I'm looking forward to your discussions this week and your use of the balanced scorecard. Thanks a lot.